Before we dive deeper, hit that subscribe button, like, and comment below. This isn't just a story about prison, it's about control, manipulation, and a twisted network of power that goes back to the very roots of America's penitentiary system. Keep watching until the end. You won't believe how it all ends. The year was 1820. Cedar Creek Penitentiary, located in a rural town in Pennsylvania, stood as a symbol of the new American approach to crime and punishment, reformation. At least, that was the theory. The reality was far darker. Inside the penitentiary, there were whispers. The walls didn't just hold prisoners, they held power. Inmates didn't fear the guards. They feared the ones behind the bars with them. It wasn't the warden who ran Cedar Creek. It was John the Snake Hamilton, a tall, brooding figure known for his ruthlessness and cunning. He wasn't the first to rise to power in such a place, but his reign would set a new precedent for the way prison gangs would shape the landscape of America's criminal system. On the surface, Hamilton had everything that an inmate should fear: the ability to smuggle contraband, manipulate the prison's weak system, and control the supply of forbidden luxuries. He didn't have the warden's keys, but he had the keys to every inmate's loyalty. As the prison's gang leader, Hamilton held the trust of his men, and that trust kept him in control. The prison guards were too busy watching for the obverse, fights, disturbances, and escapes. But behind the iron bars, it was Hamilton's silent hand that controlled the prison economy, drugs, weapons, and even information. Every time someone wanted to survive Cedar Creek, they had to answer to him. One evening, during a rare break in the usual chaos of the prison, an inmate named Samuel Green attempted something rare in Cedar Creek. He tried to escape. He wasn't trying to run from the guards. No, Samuel Green was running from Hamilton. Green had been a trusted member of the gang, but recently, his loyalty had begun to waver. He'd been selling secrets, information about gang movements to the prison staff. In a place like Cedar Creek, betrayal was a sentence worse than death. Green had planned his escape for months, waiting for the perfect moment to slip past the guards. But Hamilton had seen the cracks in his loyalty. It didn't take long before the gang leader made his move. As Green approached the outer walls of the penitentiary, he was grabbed from behind, his body slammed into the cold concrete. Hamilton's enforcers, shadows in the dark, held him there as Hamilton emerged from the shadows himself. "You thought you could escape," Hamilton said, his voice dripping with venom. "But the walls of Cedar Creek aren't just made of stone. They are made of loyalty, and you've betrayed it." The gang took Green back to the heart of the prison, where a brutal lesson was waiting. His punishment wasn't about pain, it was about humiliation. They stripped him of everything he had, making him walk the yard naked in front of the other inmates. His body wasn't just bruised, it was a symbol of what happens when loyalty is broken. By morning, Green was dead. But not from the beating. No, it was the mental torture that had finished him off. Inside Cedar Creek, you didn't die from a gunshot or a knife, you died from betrayal, from losing the loyalty that kept the gangs alive. The news spread like wildfire, but no one dared speak of it outside the prison walls. To the outside world, Cedar Creek was just a place for reformation. But on the inside, it was a place where gang lords like Hamilton held the true power. And anyone who crossed them learned the hard way: escape was never an option. As Brooks dug deeper into Hamilton's story, she unearthed the connections between him and other prison gangs across the state. Hamilton wasn't just a leader at Cedar Creek, he was the architect of a system that used fear, loyalty, and manipulation to extend his control over the prison system. But there was something darker brewing. A system was in place now, a structure that would soon grow far beyond Cedar Creek, across prisons, across states, and one man would rise to challenge Hamilton's empire. But Hamilton wasn't done yet. But when the warden found a hidden ledger that linked Hamilton to several powerful figures in the state, everything changed. The ledger found by the warden contained names, dates, and transactions that no one expected to see linked to Cedar Creek Penitentiary. It wasn't just gang activity. The names scribbled in that ledger were connected to the highest levels of government, law enforcement, and even businesses outside the prison walls. The realization hit hard for Warden John Burke. Hamilton wasn't just a leader of a prison gang. He was the head of an empire, a secret criminal network that spanned much farther than anyone could have imagined. Burke wasn't naive. He knew how power worked behind bars. But this was something else. This was not simply about a group of men struggling for control inside the prison. Hamilton's empire had tentacles that reached far beyond Cedar Creek. Brooks, now deeply involved in the investigation, had spent the last few weeks trying to unravel the truth. As she studied the documents, it became evident that Hamilton had been operating for years in plain sight, carefully building a network of corruption and control. His men inside the prison, his contacts on the streets, every transaction seemed like a carefully placed chess move, designed to keep everything running smoothly. But the ledger didn't just reveal the scope of Hamilton's power. It also hinted at something darker, a growing rivalry. The more Brooks looked into it, the more she realized that Hamilton's empire was not unchallenged. There was another figure lurking in the shadows, someone whose name had come up more and more often, Frank the Hammer Morales. Morales had been an inmate at Cedar Creek for years, but unlike Hamilton, he didn't rise to power with subtlety. Morales was a brute, a man who ruled with violence and fear. Where Hamilton was patient, Morales was impatient. Where Hamilton built alliances, Morales built wars. But there was one thing that both men had in common. They both sought the same thing: absolute control over the system. Brooks knew it wouldn't be long before this tension boiled over. If Hamilton and Morales were to clash, the consequences would be devastating not only for Cedar Creek but for prison systems across the state. Her investigation led her to an underground network within the prisoner system of tunnels and hidden rooms that few knew about. These tunnels were used not just for escape but for smuggling drugs, weapons, and illicit messages passed between inmates and their partners outside the prison. The tunnels were Hamilton's lifeline to the outside world. They allowed him to stay ahead of the law, always one step ahead of anyone who tried to intervene. It was inside one of these hidden rooms that Brooks made a chilling discovery. Frank Morales had been using the same network. But unlike Hamilton's secretive approach, Morales had been sending messages to his contacts on the outside, mysterious meetings that were scheduled with high-ranking individuals. What those meetings were about was unclear, but the fact that they were happening meant that Morales was planning something big. Brooks realized that these two men, Hamilton and Morales, were on a collision course. Both had the same goal, but their methods couldn't be more different. Where Hamilton had manipulated the system, Morales had used fear and violence to break it. The question now was, who would emerge victorious? As Brooks dug deeper into Morales' contacts, she uncovered something that shocked her to her core: a hidden alliance between Morales and several key figures in the local police department. These figures had been using their positions to protect Morales' operations from the outside, ensuring that the violence within the prison walls didn't attract unwanted attention. It was all coming together now. Hamilton's empire was about to face its greatest threat, and it wasn't just another inmate. But as Brooks prepared to confront Hamilton with the information she had gathered, the unthinkable happened. One evening, as she returned to her office, she found her files had been tampered with. The documents, evidence she had meticulously gathered, were gone. But there was a note left behind. It read, "You've been digging in the wrong places. Now, you'll learn what it means to play the game." Brooks stared at the note. It was short, cryptic, but the message was unmistakable. Someone knew exactly what she had uncovered. The documents, the evidence, had been taken. She was being watched. And now, the men she had been chasing were moving faster than she could keep up. The realization set in as she grabbed the file, now incomplete. Hamilton and Morales weren't just opponents in a game of power. They were part of a far-reaching network, one that didn't just control Angola, but much of the criminal world outside the walls of the prison. Brooks could feel it. The walls were closing in. The note left in her office hadn't been a mere threat, it had been a warning. It wasn't just a matter of gathering information anymore, it was about survival. As Brooks struggled to piece together what had been taken, a familiar face appeared in the doorway: Detective Carlos Rivera, a man she had trusted throughout her investigation. But something was different now. There was a coldness in his eyes, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. "Carlos," Brooks said, her voice tight with suspicion. "What's going on?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I don't think you realize what you're dealing with, Carla," Rivera said, his tone dark. "This isn't just a matter of prison gangs. It's bigger. You're not just hunting Hamilton and Morales. You're hunting the entire system. Brooks's heart sank as she realized what he was implying. Carlos Rivera wasn't just another detective. He had been part of the system all along. He had been compromised. He was working with them. He had been feeding information to Hamilton and Morales. The betrayal hit her like a punch to the gut. Carlos Rivera, the man who had been helping her, had been a silent accomplice, working against her every step of the way. He was part of the network. Rivera stepped closer, his expression now unreadable. You've been a pawn in their game this whole time, Carla. The sooner you realize it, the better. You can't win this fight. The game is rigged. Why, Carlos? Brooks's voice trembled with disbelief. Why didn't you tell me? He shook his head, a grim smile forming. Because you didn't need to know. You were always meant to be part of the narrative, but not the ending. In that moment, Brooks realized she wasn't just facing two dangerous men. She had been dealing with an entire network of corruption, one that spanned beyond the walls of Angola, infecting the very system meant to contain it. The gang lords of Angola didn't just control the prisoners, they controlled the people who were supposed to uphold justice. As she stood there, stunned, the door to her office swung open once more. Two armed officers entered, their hands resting on the holsters at their sides. Detective Brooks, one of them said, his voice cold, "You're under arrest." The betrayal was complete. There would be no escape. Brooks tried to move, but the officers were too fast, and in an instant, she was subdued. The handcuffs were cold against her wrists, and her mind raced, her thoughts fighting to keep up with the whirlwind of events. As they led her out of her office, she looked back, catching a glimpse of the unopened files on her desk, the files that held the last shred of truth she had. But it was too late. The information she had uncovered was gone. As they walked through the corridors of the station, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The gang lords, Hamilton, and Morales, they had won, but something inside Brooks told her this story was far from over. The system she had been fighting against was much deeper than she could have ever imagined. She had thought she was exposing the truth, but in reality, she had been lured into a trap set by the very people she was investigating. As she was placed into the back of the police car, one final thought crossed her mind. The war for control in Angola was far from over, and now, she was just another casualty of the system that had swallowed her whole. They thought Carla Brooks would break, but sometimes the system can't silence the truth. Stay tuned for more, because the story isn't over yet. Subscribe, like, and hit the bell for more true crime mysteries. The battle for justice is just beginning.